still got some bits. I mean, I've got plenty of space to move stuff around on up here. I mean, like this. I don't know if you've seen this. This is the real spares basket. There was like 2 of them. I just put them together, but I'll show you with the other camera and make life easier. So as you can see, this is like the spares box. This is all broken reels. You can see that most of them that are in here are fixed spools, because fixed spools just tend to break easier. You know, multipliers last a lot longer. And the fixed spools, they are like a flawed design, you might say, because they are a crank handle as opposed to like these, a little winch. You're putting force on the side, which sort of, especially with plastic and graphite, buckles or can twist misshape with big fish, and you can slip gears and all sorts. But eventually they do wear out, these reels. And like I said, this was just crap. This is a Linif, whatever they call it. Their reels, a few years back they were something else. They really were. I mean, I don't know what they're like now, but those are the original ones. That's just the spare 3.2 GT. There's 2 of these, so one's still being used. This one's just a donor now. The spool's like jammed. You can't get the spool to release. I've tried, I've hammered it and done all sorts to release that spool on that, and it would not release. But all the parts on it's still good, apart from the spool, which is jammed. So if you get a really big fish, you won't better, it'll just snap the line, put it that way. So yeah, and this one in here actually only used twice, and that packed up. That was one of these free spool ones where you just click a button on the back. That went all wrong and it didn't work. And there was a Chieftain reel. There was a Fladden one, the Chieftain range I wouldn't bother with personally. They do some okay reels, because I've had reels off them. I've got some somewhere that I still use. But the Chieftain one, for some reason, was just it's a very cheap make there. Right, let me put this back up. But like I say, very useful if you need parts, because you'll see things like with fixed spools. That's obviously the main gear wheel off one of the reels, but you'll also notice that that's the main gear wheel off one of the reels, and they are exactly the same. So some parts you can reuse, bail arms, that sort of thing. I'll just keep it up there when I service reels. Like I said, sometimes it's just a case of you might use like a washer, you know, a simple little stainless washer that you just need to pack out your casing maybe or whatever, because your gears aren't tight enough, and it just tightens it up, that sort of thing. So very useful. And we've got our fixed spools here. There is some more there. There's one in the car as well that I've been using. But they're hung up there. I'll show you with the other camera again. But here you see we've got the fixed spools. This actual stainless bar up here, this is off like in a butcher, a meat locker. They have these they hang these rubber things down like tassel things that you walk through, and they close up and keep the cool in the meat locker, so you haven't got like a door. And this is the thing that holds them, and this was on an old shed here, so I just put it under there, pulled them open a little bit, and it makes perfect for like putting the reels in, fixed spools, and you just put them in like that and you can store your fixed spools, because they're always awkward fixed spools because of their shape, you know, unless you've got them on something. So that works really well for that. It's WSB, it was a DB20 multiplier, and I mean, you can see, I don't know if you can see, it's on there. It's got a little bit of corrosion, nothing, only surface stuff though, nothing really that's pitting or damaging. Now, originally when I had this reel, in fact, what I'm going to do, let me just slice off all the, because it's still rigged, get rid of that, because I'll reset for next year with what gear I'm going to take out, and with the new boat and that, we might do some different. To fall over. We might do something different with the reels and rods and that, depending on how I'm going to be fishing. So yeah, as you can see, it works perfectly fine still. This has been sitting on the boat the whole year. It's been out in salt water all year, pretty much. Now, I could say I bring all my reels in and wash them, but I don't. That's why you need some bulletproof gear when it comes to rods and reels, if you're going to leave any gear out there. I usually leave the older reels out there, but this one I took out. It's not an expensive reel. So there's that. So I thought I'd might give that another rinse actually, the bottom of that rod. Yeah, rod's still in good nick. Yeah, so it all appears okay. It's still perfectly fine. Like I say, it's a bit worn and that, but it's been used a lot. Drags, does the drag still? Drag's a bit stiff, but let me just check. It goes one way. Okay, will it go back? That's the question. Yeah, okay, we're good. So, drag's fine. That works okay. This works okay. That never clicks, you have to click it back, this one. Yeah, I get a lot of that with reels though, even when they do or don't, or should or shouldn't. So, something got down there for a minute. There we go. Yeah, so it all seems fine. And like I said, the corrosion isn't bad. What's bad is when you get corrosion and it sort of pits, start to really pit in, but this is only superficial, like powdery surface kind of corrosion. And like I say, these sit on the boat, they're exposed, so they sit in all the saltwater spray and when they get rained on every year, so it's done okay. The only issue I had with this reel is when I first had it, after a couple of days of using it, it wouldn't wind. It wouldn't wind, something like that. Or I couldn't let the line out, or stop the line, or something, or reverse backwards or something. But anyway, it wasn't working. So I took it apart and there was a little tiny screw which had come undone inside. And I put that little screw back in and it was fine. And it's been fine for the rest of the year. So it just wasn't put together properly, shall we say. But no, everything works fine. So that's 1 year down. Should last quite a few more years looking at it. So that's a good one. These other ones that I use on here, this one's still got a line on I need to get off. This one here is the Pen 320 GT. This has been on the boat for, this sat on the boat for 6-7 years, I don't know, it's a long time. And before that, this was a friend's reels, and he had these on his boat for God knows how many years. Admittedly, I think that his boat was more cabined, whereas mine it just sits out in the open, but they still work. The only problem with this I found was, see if this one still works. Yeah, the drags, it's really weird, but the drags tighten up. I've got another one up there, GT, which is in pieces, and the drag got so, oh yeah, the drag works. The drag got so tight that I couldn't get the line off it, and even taking it apart and hammering it and all sorts, I could not get it free. So I ended up binning it for parts for that one, sort of donor parts for this one. But I mean, it hasn't really needed the parts, it works perfectly fine, that GT. And there is another one. Yeah, this is a nice little one as well. I've replaced the handle on this. This was the Pen 310. And basically the handle wore and it would just flip round because it's a very fine tolerance where it sits on. But luckily I had an old reel where the reel knackered up, which was the Shakespeare. They have a habit of doing that. So I took the spare Shakespeare handle that came with the new reel, which knackered up, and I put it onto this. I filed the shape so it fitted, and it's fine. And this is a lovely little reel. In fact, it's in much better condition than that one, though that was done an extra year on the boat. But the only thing I would say is if this handle goes a second time there, I don't think I'll be able to fix that again. I'd have to replace the thing. So it might be time to get another reel. But what's interesting, those reels are much older than this one, and yet this one, look at this one. This is a pen as well, but this is one of my newest pens, and it's in worse condition. I say worse condition, it's got a lot of corrosion, it's got rust coming out of it. It just looks a mess, even though it still works fine. It just looks a mess. But not overly impressed with this one. It did actually have a counter on it, but well, I would say I cut it. Well, I did cut it off, but the only reason I cut it off is because I was out fishing one time, and you know when you get one of those days when everything goes wrong. I mean, I lost most of my fishing weights. I lost most of my lures. I don't know. I felt it might have not fallen over, but did something to the boat. I broke the top of a rod, and then I'd had enough, and I just threw the rod across the boat, and I broke it had a line counter, and the idea was I bought one with a line counter, so I thought when I'm mackerel and that, I know the depth that I was dropping to. Didn't work out too well, that line counter, bit of a waste of time, so I cut it off anyway. So now it's just a basic reel, does the trick. Only used it for a couple of years and it looks a lot worse than the old ones, so. But like I say, it still functions fine, even though it looks a mess. So looking at the reels I use regular, the multipliers, I've got the couple of Abus there, which I use regular. I've got the pen down there, which is the sort of boat one, or the main boat one in the corner. And then this little one, which I was messing around with this year with a bit of spinning. I haven't used it a lot, but I do use it. And of course there's all these on top of that. Just shows how many reels you accumulate when you do this much fishing. I didn't realise I had this many multipliers in here, but there you go. Right, as you'd have just seen a bit earlier, I showed you this reel. This is my first reel. It's from the 80s. It's an Olympus. And I showed you this one, I believe it was. This one, which is from 60s probably, I would have said, maybe 70s, something like that. A French one. And you would have seen that one. I mean, look at the quality. I mean, the quality in that. I mean, it's just smooth as that. Smooth as. This one here is identical to this one. But this one was my mother's reel. This is my mother's fishing reel that she had. Again, at a date, you're looking at 70s, possibly 60s for this. I'm not exactly sure on the date on that. I haven't been able to check it up, but it's pre-80s, put it that way. So it's somewhere in that region. But this reel here has actually seen many a turbot. You remember the days when turbot used to be 20 to 30 pound? Well, that's what this thing used to see. And this was my father's. And this one again, this one, there's not even any play in this. This is absolutely, it's like it came out the showroom, well, out the factory yesterday. But this thing has been used for years and years, and it's good. And this one here, this has had the most use out of all of them. This apparently was the most used reel for many years, and this one probably does go back to around the 60s, I would have thought, that one. And this here, this is a Woolworths reel. Yeah, you did hear me correct. That is a Woolworths reel. I didn't even know Woolworths sold reels, but they did. Apparently they were Winfields. So technically it's a Winfield, maybe not a Woolworth, but it was still sold in Woolworths. And it's had the most use. It's a little bit rattly on the handle there. Might be able to better tighten up, I have to see. But I mean, this reel's like, how old is that? 40 for 60 years old, something like that. And look at it. It's still perfect. Well, apart from that little bit of rattle and squeak. I mean, that's when they used to produce quality. I mean, you look at that one, which is a few years later, and I mean, this thing is in absolute perfect condition, you could say. But even so, Woolworth. I mean, that's not a Daiwa, that's not an Abu, it's not a Shimano, that's a Woolworth or Winfield. But same thing, you know. And look at it, it's still going to this day. Like I say, this is when they used to make quality. I mean, look at that. I mean, it's got corrosion, of course. It's very old. And it's been lying on a boat every summer, sitting in a boat in the elements. And then you look at that one. Again, prime quality. You know, they started making reels probably. Then they sort of progressed to making reels that were sort of real quality. Then we start getting to the 80s, which is here. And you can see there's corrosion starting. We're starting to use belters or alloys of some description which are corroding, and it's started to fall a bit. And then we move to modern reels, and I mean, there's one there. This is a terrible one actually. I've come across two of these. I found this in the ocean. I think somebody had actually thrown it in the sea because they were so disgusted with it, but it looked pretty much brand new after they'd thrown it in. And I had one ages ago. It lasted about a week. Plastic, I assume it's plastic, and it's just, I mean, that's been used literally probably a few trips and it's already, I mean, it doesn't work. The whole thing is just, you see, it won't wind or anything. It's knackered. So the progression of fishing reels, eh? You would think with all the new technology we would be having the best quality, but it seems the best quality was sort of, it started out, they started making them obviously many years ago, got to around the 60s and that, then it looks like you had your highest quality around the 60s, 70s. As soon as you got to the 80s and onwards, things started to take a turn for the worst. There you go. I just thought I'd show you those. We'll actually take them out one time. We'll line. I will clean them all up, reline them. We'll take them out sometime. But you can see the line. That's the line that's been on there ever since then. I mean, it's probably just going to be falling apart. It's probably turned to powder, that side bit. While I'm going through a few fishing lines, and there's quite a few here. Got a lot of old fishing spools from with different lines on. People ask me quite often what line do I use or what strength line do I use. That varies a lot. When I'm boat fishing down to the bottom, I use 40-50 pound braids. Sometimes I'll use a 30 pound mono, but usually it's 40 or 50 pound braid, and it'll have a 30 pound or 40 pound, no, it's mostly 30 pound leader. Obviously, because if you go in the rocks, if you nick or scratch braid, it will break just like that. I actually saw a guy doing a test on it, and he did one rub over sandpaper and the braid would snap, and yet he did 20, 30, 40 rubs with mono over the rock, so it does break very easily if you snag against rocks. So yeah, so it's always a 40 or 50 pound braid with a leader, and that's general fishing, like for the pollock, the bass, you know, just dropping straight down fishing in. Wreck fishing, I'd probably use something similar actually. I'd probably use like 50-60 pound line, maybe, yeah, probably 50-60 pound line with a 40 pound leader or trace, something along those lines. And general fishing, like shallower, closer in sort of boat work, I don't tend to use so much of the heavy stuff. Then, like when you see me trailing and stuff like that, then I drop to, well, it could be anything from 15 to 30 pound, depending on what I'm doing. General fishing, 25 pound is fine. If I'm, say, fishing for wrasse and that, because they are a very powerful fish and go into the rocks, I'd up my lines to sort of 30 pound main line. Obviously, that's because if you hook up 7 pound wrasse, it's just gonna, you're not gonna stop it with a thin line, put it that way. And when I'm spinning, ooh, tricky one that. 15 up to 25. If I'm out deep, trailing lines, 25. If I'm casting, say from the dinghy or the boat close in, or from the shore work, then I'm using sort of 15 to 20 pounds usually. You can go lower, you can go down to 12s and that. You just got to be a little bit cautious of the rocks, and it all depends on your line as well, how good your line is. I mean, some 12s aren't as strong as other 12s, if you know what I mean. I've said it before, I don't tend to use braid from shore or spinning. I always use, not always, but most of the time I use mono. I do have braid set up on this little reel, but that's because it's such a small little reel. Obviously the diameter is a lot thinner for such a small reel. Using braid, I wouldn't get enough sort of line on here, and it might be a bit tricky with such a small reel, so that's got braid on. That's just a little spinning outfit. And yeah, but you have to fish slightly different, I've noticed, with braid. When you hooking fish, like with mono, they grab it, you strike it, you know, when they grab the lure. With mono, they grab it, I hesitate, I would say. I don't pause, I hesitate. Hesitate for just that second, or just that fraction of a second. So mono is kind of bang, strike. Braid is kind of bang, strike. And there's just that pause, because you've got to give them a chance, because you can almost rip the lure out their mouths if they haven't quite got hold of it, because they will sort of grab it and mouth it sort of thing quite often. As for types of line, that's up to you. What you know, I use all sorts. I use trilene. I'm about to try this Blades one, which I've heard is good, but I haven't tried it yet. I use WSB lines. One's called Impact. There is another one, I think it's called Specimen or something like that. I'm not certain on that, I don't have a lot. Oh, there's one there. Specimen mono, again it's a WSB branded one. And braids, well, I've been using, I bought this Spectre Extreme braid. Now I have used it on the spin, I haven't actually used it on the main, I haven't relined my multipliers with this yet. So I haven't used it for that, although I have used it on that rod. That was this one over here. That's the 30 pound one. And so far it's been fine. I've not had any issues with it yet. The old one I used to use, I don't remember what that make was, but that's been on there. On those boat rods, that braid on those rods has been there for 6 or 7 years, and it's still fine. So that tells you something. Apart from that, like I say, that's pretty much all I use. I mean, I tend to buy my lines in bulk of 6, 10, 20, whatever amounts of line, and I just go with that. Line, you know, most lines, I find most lines are okay. I get the odd one like this one here, which was utter shite, basically. And that was the most expensive one I've ever bought. And it cost me my best fish, so, or what I believe to be one of my best fish ever. All because of that. And then, like I say, it snapped using bullet leads and all sorts. It was just garbage. Now, as you can see, I buy hooks like this in boxes. I tend to buy hooks by the hundreds or the thousands, more the hundreds. Normally I buy sort of 200 or 300 of the same hook. It's because I make up those lines for the mackerel, pollock and that's why I buy a lot. And also it's cheaper. I mean, I did buy some hooks once. I bought 1,000 or 2,000, and when I bought 1,000 or 2,000, the hooks, they were 6.0 Aberdeens, they cost me 6p a hook. I think it was 6p a hook. So work that out. How many hooks do you get in a packet these days? You don't get many. I know some packs used to be like 10 hooks, and I think they dropped to sort of like some of them packets only got 3 or 5 hooks or something stupid. And they're charging over here anything from £2 to £5 a packet. Well, you work that out. I think most hooks are like 50, 60, 70p a hook or something like that. 6p a hook. You can't go wrong. Anyway, I buy these ones. I buy them in bulk, you might say. And again, these are just these particular ones are WSB ones. I got mustards and camisards and all that sort of stuff. As far as makes and that, the WSB hooks, which are these, there is nothing wrong with this. Is what I use mostly. They are chemically sharpened. I'll show you actually. They're these ones in the packets are like this. When you get them in packets, these are 7.0s. They're heavy duty uptides, and I use these for most things. Like heavier stuff like bass, pollock. The 4.0s I'll use for mackerel, and they work perfectly fine, and I've never had problems with these. Then most hooks are pretty much a much. These ones here were not good. They've got like this coating which almost flakes off them. I can't remember what they were called. They are razor sharp still. They do still catch fine. They're not made as well, but they do the job. Like I say, for mackerel lines and that, they're fine. So yeah, hooks. If I was going to recommend a hook, the one hook that I would use for bassing, that kind of thing, when you're going for those specimens, the one I would recommend would be Cox and Rule. If you're going to spend any money on hooks, Cox and Rule. I mean, your mustads and all these other makes are fine as well. But Cox and Rule, I like the wide gape on them because obviously they're a Viking style. They are razor sharp and they really catch well. I mean, those things are lethal. So if you need the sharpness and you want to spend a bit of money on a hook, go with the Cox and Rules. The only thing I would say about hooks is just make sure you're not using a dull hook. Just put your finger on like that, and if you feel it hook your skin, your hook's fine. If you can put it on your finger and it doesn't hook the skin, like when you put it on, just sort of drag it a little bit, just like that, it literally hooks the skin, that is sharp enough. And of course when you're fishing, when you change your bait or whatever, you know, every so often if you've hooked the bottom or some seaweed, always put your finger and just check that, because some hooks you will find will dull off quickly, and then just change your hook if you get that, and you'll know over time if your hooks are doing it all the time that you should be not using those hooks and use something else. So, but, the thing is with hooks, I almost never reuse my hooks. If I go fishing with bait and that, I don't reuse my hooks. I buy hooks like this, these sort of hooks, and if they're left in salt water, within a day or two the tips and barbs are completely rusted off. So, you know, I did actually buy some hooks one day. They looked similar to this, and I went fishing somewhere one night. I went about, I think about 2 in the morning, and I actually was fishing and I was so tired I actually fell asleep. And I woke up at about 5 or 6. Anyway, my line was still out. Of course I hadn't caught anything, and I brought it in and the tip of the hook had actually rusted off in that short time. Those hooks were so bad, they were so biodegradable, they were degrading when you were trying to fish with them. So I stopped using those. I mean, I know you want a hook that's going to break down, obviously rust away quick as possible, because if you lose it in a fish, you don't want it in the fish too long. But those hooks were ridiculous. They really were. But no, I tend to use these because they do rot away quite quickly. It's the same with the trebles these days. I quite often use the sort of, not the bronze, but these sort of black kind of ones because they're nice and sharp. And I know the galvanised ones last a long time. I would use the galvanised ones like that on big lures because it's a big hook and you don't want it rotting away straight away, a hook like that, if you've got a huge, great lure. More so for your lure of having to change it all the time, and you need the strength and all the rest of it. Whereas these slightly smaller lures, I just use ones like that, and they'll rust out pretty quick if you left them in the sea water, obviously. And they're a bit sharper. I think the galvanised ones aren't quite as sharp as those other ones. But if you're using a great big lure, you're going to have a hell of a fish grabbing it, so you don't have to worry about that fine sharpness that you get on smaller hooks. So there you go, we're making slow, steady progress. A bit like this channel, really. And obviously if you like the videos, give it a thumbs up. If you want to help the videos, consider subscribing to them, because that helps out in the YouTube's algorithm to get these videos seen by more people. On top of that, if you want to help out, consider cut and pasting the link of the video you're watching, or one you like, into your social media, and that will spread it amongst a lot of other people that maybe you will think will be interested in these sort of videos, whether it's the shed ones or whether it's the fishing ones. Right, I think I'm going to stop for today and carry on tomorrow.